Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Pro Wrestling Straight Shooter. I'm your host as always, Tats Deej. I want to thank everybody again for sticking with me, and if you're new on board, thank you for watching and coming back. This is my show where I talk about anything and everything, at least WWE related, if not pro wrestling related. Get in on the discussion. Find me on Twitter, find me on Tumblr, share it with your friends. If your friends like watching wrestling and you guys like talking about it, jump in here with me. Last episode I talked about, the 5 things I thought the WWE was doing right, and I talked specifically, well not specifically, but a bit about the PG13 era versus the Attitude Era, and I thought I'd jump right in and do a full-blown discussion on comparing and contrasting the two and the frustrations that people feel with the PG13 era versus the love that we felt for the Attitude Era. Let's face it, as a wrestling fan, was there ever any better time to be alive than during the Attitude Era? There really wasn't. We had great characters, we had hard-hitting, biting, cutting-edge storylines. It brought us Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, The Undertaker's Dark Side gimmick, the Acolyte Protection Agency, the Hardy Boys, the Dudleys, Edge and Christian. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of good quality stuff that came out of the Attitude Era. The matches were top-notch, and you could just go on for hours about how awesome the Attitude Era was. And then when you compare it to today's dubbed PG-13 era, it just, by comparison, today wrestling just seems kind of weak. And I'll be the first to admit that. It's not as much fun as it was 15 years ago. Okay. But there's also some good things to take into consideration with the PG-13 era, but there's also a side of the business that I don't think a lot of people understand. When the Attitude Era was in full swing, we had some fantastic storylines and some fantastic gimmicks, but we also had its fair share of garbage. There were guys who their careers got killed because they got saddled with gimmicks that had no future, and the number one that I'll point out being Val Venis. I was really big on Val Venis as a in-ring talent. The guy looked good, the guy could go in the ring, and the guy could talk. He had the 3 essential elements of being a long-lasting superstar in the business, and he got saddled with a gimmick that inevitably had no future. So guys, and he's just one of several guys who got saddled with gimmicks that, while they were good for the moment, they couldn't get away from it, and they couldn't find anything that worked for them past that, and as a result, those guys faded away, and it's sad because I think they had a lot to offer to the business. Something else were, for all the good storylines they had, there was some garbage, man. Raise your hand if you absolutely believed for any split second that Paul Bearer banged The Undertaker's mom on the kitchen floor and 9 months later Whammo Kane came out. Raise your hand if you really bought that Kane got into a car accident and killed Katie Vick and that Triple H had sex with her corpse in the coffin. Awful. Garbage, man. I mean, it just, and there was, the list goes on and on with that kind of stuff too. I think while there were some really good, shocking moments that they did really well, there were some shocking moments that they went too far in an attempt to try and rattle everyone's cages. Does anybody remember the Mark Henry simulated oral sex thing when he was doing Sexual Chocolate? Again, not that I'm offended by oral sex by any stretch of the imagination, but for TV at the time, and even Vince McMahon has said this, it was inappropriate, and hindsight being 2020, he probably wouldn't do it again, and he wouldn't have done it at the time. Looking forward to the PG-13 era, it's quite safe to say you're not going to find anybody doing any of that kind of stuff there now, and some of the storylines are rather weak. And even, just kind of looking at it, I've been more following the matches and not so much the storylines. But looking back at the last 4 or 5 months, everything that they've done with the Authority and, firing Dolph Ziggler and Ryback and, Eric Rowan? Yeah, firing him, and then John Cena having to work to get their jobs back, and everything that they're doing to integrate Sting. I think it's good writing for what they're allowed to do in this day and age. And allowed being the operative word, that's what I want to talk about here for a couple of minutes. Things for the WWE really changed with the Attitude Era. During the Attitude Era, it was at its height of its popularity, at the height of its money-making potential, and Vince McMahon went public with the company, and in doing that, kind of cuffed his own hands a little bit creatively, and I don't think he saw it at the time, and I don't think anybody really looked at it because they were on a steam train. It was a license to print money, and everybody just let him go with it. But slowly but surely, as the more raunchy and inappropriate and over the top and just too far over the line gimmicks and characters and storylines started to come out, the people who had money to lose on these ventures were starting to lose money because the advertisers were starting to drop out. And I followed the rag sheets fairly closely and followed the news, and big name money contributors and advertisers were dropping out. Your Pepsis, your Coca-Colas, and these are people that pump millions of dollars worth of advertising into television shows. And when you lose that advertising dollar, that somebody takes a pay cut. You know, somebody loses money. You have people you have to answer to when you rely on advertising dollars to book your shows. And this is how, even on the independent level, advertisers pay for these shows. I remember when I was wrestling, and you know, our booker, our promoter, he was talking about how this advertiser was there and that advertiser was there. And when we'd get to the show, he's like, look, boys, I've got these guys booking an advertising. You guys got to watch your mouths out there if you're on the microphone. You can't do this, you can't do that. And you know, and this was at an independent level with 500 people sitting in the stands. So you can imagine when you're running a multi-million to $100 million company with millions of advertising dollars on the line, you have to follow the rules. Okay, it sucks, but that's the way it is. Same thing when you've got a board of directors, and these board of directors are investing in your company, and they're, one, starting to lose money on advertising dollars, and two, they're starting to look at the product on TV, and they're looking at Vince McMahon as the figurehead of this board, and they're going, okay, you need to answer some questions. You have tough decisions to make, and you have to steer your company in a direction that's not going to lose you advertising dollars, but at the same time, balance that line between making your fans of your product happy, and that's where I really think the slippery slope comes in. Wrestling fans are very fickle. They like what they like, and the majority of the people that I grew up with watching wrestling we didn't grow up in the Attitude Era. We were in our mid-late 20s when the Attitude Era was in full swing, but that was our fun time for the business, and you just can't run that business like that anymore. What worked 15 years ago on TV isn't going to work now. The advertisers aren't going to pay for it. They're not going to invest their money in something that they think is garbage. And the problem that you run into as far as that goes as well is if you're not making the fans happy, if you're not giving them a little bit of what they want, you're losing viewers. And in losing viewers, your advertisers are going to lose money. So there's really, and Triple H talked about it a little bit on the Stone Cold podcast, as well as Vince McMahon. It's hard to please everyone, and you really have to find a happy medium in how you deliver your product, not only for your advertisers, but for your fans. And in the PG-13 era, I think they've gone too far in the other direction in not giving people that edgy programming that they grew to love. And if you want to draw back that core wrestling fan that loved the Attitude Era, you've got to give them a little bit of that attitude back. And they try. You know, you've still got the Hell in the Cell matches and the tables, ladders, and chair matches, which are all holdover gimmick matches from the Attitude Era. But again, there's an argument to say that they're watered down. Guys are bouncing off the cage. Guys are going through tables. Nobody's bleeding. Nobody's cut. And I've talked about the bleeding and the cutting before. I don't think we need to see buckets and buckets of blood like we did in the Attitude Era, but it'd be nice every once in a while if a guy bled to add to the realism of the event. I think back to a couple of different events in particular where the blood was the story. You know, I think it was a SummerSlam, and I forget the date. It was Bret Hart versus Davey Boy Smith. The match in and of itself was fantastic, but what everybody remembers was Bret Hart leaking like a sieve and bleeding all over the place. And that, in and of itself, sold the match. Another one, again, involving Bret Hart, was Stone Cold Steve Austin and the submission match with Ken Shamrock doing the officiating. Steve Austin bleeding and Bret Hart locking him up in the sharpshooter and squeezing all that blood out of him is what sold that match. It's part of the story. And every once in a while, you can add that element to tell that story to help further a character. I think it's okay, and I think in the PG-13 environment, you can still get away with that once in a while. And the advertisers, you know, and the investors need to understand that that's part of the product, pal. If you're investing in this company, you're investing in an audience that wants something, and you damn well better be prepared to give that audience what it wants. And in the eyes of a lot of people, they're not doing that with the PG-13 era. And you can blame who you want. You can blame Vince McMahon. You can blame the writing staff. But at the end of the day, their hands are tied. Like I've said, you know, you read online and everybody's blaming this one, blaming that one. More offensively, they blame John Cena. You know, I've read that one recently. They, you know, John Cena is the reason why I have the PG-13 watered down era. John Cena doesn't have shit to do with the PG-13 watered down era. He's another guy making a paycheck, doing the job that they ask him to do within the constraints of how they allow him to do it. And I think he's doing the best job that he can. And I'm going to do an entire episode on John Cena here in the near future. But I think there has to be a balance between the Attitude Era because we loved it. And the thing is, they know we loved it. Like I talked in one of my last episodes, it's all over the network. WWE gets it. They know we loved the Attitude Era. They would probably love to be able to deliver us some of that Attitude Era flavor, but they can't. Or they've gone so far in the other direction that they don't know how to bring it back. And I'm really hoping that somewhere in the near future they're able to do that, because I'd like to see more people watching. I'd like to see more people engaging, because as a fan, I love pro wrestling. I love WWE specifically, and I'm not about to stop watching it. But I'd like to see enough people invested in it as viewers and as fans to keep it going for a long time to come. I hope that it's something my kids enjoy, and 20 years from now, their kids enjoy. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Did I leave something out that maybe should have taken into consideration? Also, I want to hear some topics from you guys. Is there something specifically about WWE or pro wrestling that you want me to talk about? Leave it on a comment here. Get in touch with me on Twitter. Get in touch with me on Tumblr. I'm Tats Deej. Share my videos. Get in on the discussion. And I'm out.